I will share that in the chat. As always, feel free to ask questions at any point in the event in the chat box. I'll go ahead and get things started by saying hello. So feel free, like I said, to ask any questions during the event for anyone in particular who's on our panel. Today we're luckily joined by Blair St. Olson, Blair from Generation 180. Yeah, the pointing at me because this is the second time in a row I've messed up someone's name, so I apologize. But we're really fortunate to be joined by her and have her offer our expertise, her expertise. And so going ahead and putting the Facebook Live link in the chat. Feel free to share that on our social media, helps get the word out. But this video, as always, will be on our Facebook page and on our Grassroots Conversations webpage. So before we dive into the discussion, we're just going to have a quick check-in with our intrepid lobbying team, legislative and political director Connor Kish, to talk about our priority legislation, their status, and any important updates from this week. So take it away, Connor.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everybody watching on Facebook Live and in the Zoom. I want to just give a brief update before I turn it over to the folks who are going to be diving into the discussion today. On 2 points, I want to give a quick update on procedure and the session schedule, and then give a little bit of an update on where the Sierra Club priority legislation is as we are here on Crossover Day. So Crossover is the day when the House and the Senate must complete the work on their own bills before the bills then move over to the other chamber. So it's a very important day. All legislation that was introduced in the House has to pass, and all legislation introduced in the Senate has to pass. So it's an important day on the calendar, and really sort of traditionally marks the halfway point of session. Of note this year is the procedural issue involving how long the session will be. And so we typically have a 46-day session and then a 60-day session the following year. However, due to a motion by Republican members of the House and Senate to not agree to extend the session, it was scheduled to be a 30-day session. Until yesterday afternoon, when Governor Northam called a special session of the General Assembly to begin on Wednesday and last for 16 days. What that means is that we will have more time to get legislation through the General Assembly, and legislators will have more time to complete their work. So that is good news. There will be a couple of procedural votes that have to happen to make sure that all legislation can continue and be heard during the special session that'll happen probably at the early part of next week. And then just to touch briefly on, just to wrap that up, the new end date of the session will be on February 27th. So switching now to discussing some of our legislative priorities and where things stand at the moment. You're here to hear about clean transportation, so I won't touch on those bills, but a couple other pieces of legislation are moving forward. As of yesterday, two pieces of legislation that would further regulate pipelines in Virginia advanced out of the Senate Agriculture Committee, which we were really excited about. We put a lot of effort into those bills and trying to lay the groundwork to ensure that our regulatory agencies have more oversight and do more reviews of what these pipeline companies are doing to our land and our water and our air. So we're really excited about those votes in Senate Agriculture Committee yesterday, and those bills are headed onto the Senate floor today for a vote. So we'll be watching those closely. There's a couple other pieces of legislation that didn't fare so well yesterday in the Senate Agriculture Committee that we were really pushing hard for. Legislation to reform how we handle solid waste in Virginia, and would have put a moratorium on the construction of new landfills in Virginia for 2 years while a study was done to determine whether there actually is a need for more landfills in Virginia, whether we actually need that additional waste capacity. Unfortunately, that bill did not pass in Senate Agriculture, and neither did a similar piece of legislation that would have protected historic resources from being really overrun by additional projects, particularly landfills and other waste projects, and that bill also did not pass. So we were disappointed about those two efforts. There were two other bills that I'll mention before turning it back over to Tim that we are excited about related to environmental justice that'll ensure that for the long haul, agencies of the state government and secretaries in the governor's cabinet will consider environmental justice policies within each of their agencies and secretariats and work together to ensure that the work of the future administration and the last year of the Northam administration ensures that environmental justice is a priority across all agencies, and that the agencies work together to consider how their ongoings will affect environmental justice and then communicate that to each other. So Senator Hashmi and Delegate Simons have bills to establish the Interagency Environmental Justice Working Group to ensure that those policies continue to be pushed forward and aren't left behind once again. So we're glad to see both of those bills pass. So that's just a quick update on our priority legislation that doesn't relate to clean transportation at the moment. Stay tuned next week for the maneuver from regular session into special session, and we'll see how that goes and continue to push forward all the legislation that remains at the end of today when we determine the final bills that pass out of the House and the final bills that pass out of the Senate. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Tim so that the rest of the discussion can continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connor. And I actually just received an email saying that all the rate making bills, so issues that we discussed last week, just passed the House. So breaking news for anyone who is not watching the live stream of the House of Delegates right now. All right, so that's a quick update on all of our legislative priorities. We're going to turn now to the topic of our discussion, which of course is on clean transportation. And before we get into the legislation, we think it's important to provide context around the issue that the legislation is aimed at tackling. So I'm going to pass it over to Kelsey Crane, who is, of course, our campaign and policy director here at the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, who's going to describe why clean transportation is so vital to addressing climate change.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, really excited to continue conversations about this topic and to see so much energy in this legislative session around some of these really great opportunities we have for public health and climate solutions in Virginia in this legislative session. Our legislators came into this legislative session with a lot of important issues in front of them. Our transportation systems are really tied to human health and quality of life. The same pollutants that we're worried about when we're looking at climate solutions, everything that's coming out of tailpipes, all of the carbon pollutions, we can apply a lot of solutions that cut those across the board, that eliminate those tailpipe, eliminate all of those tailpipe pollutants that are harming communities through some really effective legislation. And then transportation is also a huge piece of how we are planning our cities and our towns. We can and should be taking climate change and public health into strong consideration for all of our current and future planning. We need to be looking critically at what justice looks like in a transportation system, what policies have gotten us to the inequities we have in our current transportation system, and how the transition to cleaner transportation systems can be a just transition. We're looking at the kind of historical background. There's still impacts of redlining and housing policies that shape our transportation systems and shape our current housing systems, shape people's access to food and other basic needs, how able they are to access work and school and recreation opportunities, and just be able to fully just enjoy all of the everything in their city for quality of life, making sure that there is equal access to all of those services and those needs that people have. I think there's a big piece of that where people are recognizing that we can't continue to operate our current transportation systems on fossil fuels and address the climate crisis and protect public health. Transportation air pollutants are one of the top causes of deaths related to harmful air pollution. There has been some studies that in the past have shown that there are more deaths from air pollution related to cars than there are from car accidents, which is a really striking fact. And we've seen more recent data from the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action study, which did show that there are a lot of communities here in Virginia that are experiencing poor air quality and would benefit from some of the policies that we're looking at to move towards cleaner transportation. And I know we're going to highlight a couple of those bills now, but those pieces around being able to simultaneously bring health benefits and look critically at some climate solutions from the transportation sector are just critical connections. We need to know where to make sure that the benefits are being seen in the communities that are being impacted most. There are some issues right now in Virginia where we don't have enough air quality data. So even as we're looking at these transportation solutions, incorporating more funding for even simple things like air quality monitors so that we have the data to know where these solutions need to be most effective and are most required for different communities will make a big difference. Yeah, excited to dive into some of these bills.
Thanks, Kelsey. Really appreciate the context around these. So I think as Kelsey so eloquently just put it, transportation we can't ignore issues of transportation pollution if we're actually going to tackle climate change and prioritize public health in Virginia. So one of the best ways to do that is to get more clean cars on our roads. And we can think of nobody better than Blair from Generation 180 to talk about the Clean Cars bills. So take it away.
Tim, flattery will get you everywhere. There are definitely so many people who can talk about this bill right now because there are so many fantastic groups working on it, including the Sierra Club right here, including myself at Generation 180, and really so many people in the Virginia Conservation Network Coalition. So what the Clean Cars bill does, Advanced Clean Car Standards, HB 1965, being carried by Delegate Bagby, is essentially helps Virginia join what's called the low emission vehicle standards and zero emission vehicle standards. And it says that by model year 2025, now each auto manufacturer's auto or model year can differ a little bit in release date, from July to November, for instance, but each model year for 2025 vehicle for the low emission standard would increase the quality of the gas powered cars on our roads in terms of their efficiency and their fuel economy and the amount of emissions that they are allowed to generate. So basically it cleans up the remaining gas powered vehicles that would be sold in Virginia. But the part that I'm super interested and focused on is the zero emission vehicle standard component, which says a roughly 8% of all sales in Virginia, not registrations, but sales in Virginia for each manufacturer, starting with model year 2025, would need to be 8% electric. So the problem that seeks to address is that EVs can be considered what are called compliance cars. So the way this program works is California, based on a federal law, gets to set its own clean air standards. Other states can join in those standards. There are in progress right now about 15 states that have either adopted or are in the process of adopting those zero emission vehicle standards. So all those EVs are being sent to those states so that they can stay in compliance, which means Virginia loses out on a lot of those models. We don't get the best and brightest cars. We get, if we get them at all, sometimes the used vehicles. Really what adopting the ZEV mandate, the zero emission vehicle mandate, says is that Virginia gets access. We call dibs, we are in the line to have these vehicles sent to us so that Virginians can stop going to Maryland and New Jersey, for instance, to get their cars, which is the data that we're seeing, that Virginians who are truly dedicated to going electric have had to travel a significant number of miles in order to do so. And we want to fix that problem, not only so that we can see increased adoption for electric vehicles in Virginia, but also so that we can recoup the economic benefits of those sales. When those sales happen outside of Virginia's state lines, those are tax dollars that we're missing out on, those are fees and then registration title fees that we're missing out on, and those are jobs that we're not supporting that we need to make sure to do a better job of encouraging here in Virginia. So the bill just got through this week, the whole House. It is slated to kick off in the Senate next week. As Connor mentioned, we anticipate Monday and Tuesday, there's going to be a lot of procedural votes on what bills are going to be designated for the special session. It's procedural. You never know if people go rogue on it sometimes, but it should be sweet and easy. So we should start seeing these bills pop up in committees on the Senate. And I would just flag that the Clean Cars bill is part of a broader package of legislation that seeks to accelerate EV adoption in Virginia. We have bills on charging infrastructure. We have bills to support schools to go electric for their fleets. We have bills like an EV rebate program. There are a lot of bills that are working to push Virginia towards a electric mobility future, and they're trying to do it in the most just manner possible. And I'm really, really proud of all of the groups who've been working on these pieces of legislation for the incredible work that they've been doing. Tim, you still with us?
Yep, thank you. I had a dog walking back and forth. I didn't want to be distracting, so I took my camera off. But thank you very much, Blair. That was really comprehensive. I really appreciate you giving us a good overview of what the Clean Cars legislation looks like. Before we get into questions, we also wanted to talk about another important bill, which is the Transit Modernization Study. And so Kelsey Crane has also been working a great deal on this bill, and she'll be the one talking about it right now. So Kelsey, yeah, take it away.
And thanks, Tim. So there is another really great bill, which it's a resolution HJ 542, which is being like chief patron is Delegate McQuinn and the co-patron is Betsy Carr, Delegate Betsy Carr, and it's the Transit Equity and Modernization Study. It allows the Department of Rail and Transportation to look at a study that comprehensively evaluates where our transit system stands on several really great benefits that for existing riders and to foster increasing ridership. It's really important to make sure that we are providing increased funding for transit systems and also bike and pedestrian projects in Virginia. As we're looking at our overall transportation system, electric vehicles are a great solution, but there also need to be alternatives that allow people more and more to be able to use public transportation, bike and walk, and be able to cut down on car trips, especially more local, shorter, daily trips. And this transportation, the equity study would put us in the best position to really understand this, the needs, and have a full needs assessment for what our current riders need and what investments are required to create a better, more mobile, resilient, sustainable transportation system in Virginia, especially our public transit systems. So it looks at a full array of where we don't have benches and shelters, access, making sure that access is compliant with with accessibility standards, where we have dedicated bus lanes, infrastructure for electric buses, and fostering that transition to EV buses as well, but also integrated payment systems, some pieces in place for worker protections, being able to have GPS technology for people to live track buses, and all of that data puts us in the best position possible to understand where we can improve transit, our existing transit systems. And the electrification piece is, I think, is also important because getting transit systems ready for electric transit system is an important investment to making sure that those air pollution reductions from electrifying transportation the benefits are also going to the most impacted neighborhoods, hopefully first. So communities that have transit hubs, bus depots, where we're seeing a lot of diesel emissions and people have health impacts from that. That's a way that we can reduce those health impacts and make sure that the electrification of our transportation system is there is equity, equitable growth incorporated in that. So this bill has been getting a lot of support and is in a really good position right now. to pass. There are so many patrons supporting this in the House, and a handful of people, supporting, patronizing as patrons in the Senate. So this has passed the House and is currently in the Senate. So if you do support this bill, I believe the Rules Committee has this bill in front of them right now. So if your senator sits on the Rules Committee, please reach out to them to support HJ 542 to make sure that we have transit equity in Virginia.
Thank you, Kelsey. So we have some questions we wanted to get through as well. And I really think either of you are qualified to answer this, but what are some of the specifics of the public health impacts of transportation pollution in Virginia?
I'll take a crack and then Kelsey can add on because she knows so much about this as well. Really, what has a pretty substantial impact on public health that's directly related to the transportation sector is particulate matter 2.5. The small particulate matter that we breathe into our lungs that shouldn't be there and goes around and does a lot of damage. Essentially like something getting sucked up into a car that can ping around and hurt lots of things. You don't want it in your lungs. It's bad for your lungs, it's bad for your heart. It's really bad for our kids who don't have fully developed immune systems and fully developed organ tissue to defend from particulate matter 2.5. But there's also carbon dioxide emissions that just in general contributing to air pollution have increased effects for asthmatic cases, lost work days, really nothing coming out of, not really, period. Nothing coming out of a tailpipe is good for us to breathe. And so we need to eliminate as many as we can as quickly as possible.
Yeah, the health impacts are, there's the direct ones from the tailpipe pollution, and then people who we have a unbelievably high, disproportionately high rates of asthma in a lot of metropolitan areas in Virginia. About almost half of our carbon emissions in the state actually come from the transportation sector. And that's getting to about 30% on for the entire US, which is actually more than larger than all of our power plants combined. So those are contributing to early death, heart attacks, childhood asthma, and those are felt in more vulnerable communities. I think there's a 61% higher rate of particulate matter 2.5 in minority communities in Virginia. So there's a really fantastic, I think I mentioned the VCCA report. So most of my knowledge around what's specifically happening in Virginia, thankfully has been able to come out of that report. But we're seeing those impacts nationwide. We're seeing them here in Virginia, and then there's a variety of health impacts from the climate change in terms of heat waves and sea level rise and infectious disease spread. That because transportation is contributing so much to climate change, that we can tie to less directly tie to the transportation sector.
Thank you. We may have covered this a little bit, but I wanted to ask it because it's been a question posed is, will the clean cars legislation raise taxes or burden our state budget?
Nope, it has no budgetary implications whatsoever. There are other pieces of legislation that are moving in tandem with the clean cars legislation that do have minor budgetary implications. And all of us are trying to be very delicate of that, given we are in a pandemic. There's a lot of really good uses for money. We have found that our state budget was far better than we expected it to be when we originally reported estimates. When I say we, I mean the Northern administration originally came out with their estimates of what the budgetary impact would be in August. We far exceeded and really are in pretty good position budgetary wise, but we do have a lot of important causes. However, with that said, there's some pretty significant and burdensome budgetary impacts if we don't do these things. And so there is the need to maximize the dollars spent and make sure they're placed in the most efficient manners possible, but not doing something from a purely economic perspective would be catastrophic.
Thanks, Blair. Good to know. This one's kind of well, I think these things are related. As what does a just transition in the transportation sector look like? I mean, we're constantly talking about just transition away from our current, utility structure and power structure, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it for the transportation sector. And I guess as a two-parter in that sense is, well, let's just go with that one first, because the second part is about the transportation modernization study and what we're hoping the equity components of that are. But I think the first part of that is important to touch on first.
Sure. And it's really high level. So Kelsey mentioned we need to make sure all methods of transportation are, moved forward in this electric mobility future. And that means increased access to public transit, better bike lanes, more walkable communities, housing codes. It's really comprehensive. I'm going to focus in my answer over here on the light duty vehicle component. And then I think Kelsey is better equipped to handle the more broader transit related component of it. But when we talk about a just transition, right now, what it means is in our transition to clean energy, that we aren't leaving communities behind, like coal communities in West Virginia, for instance. And Senator Manchin from West Virginia actually recently came out and said, he's in support of clean energy, but every time we increase the amount of clean energy on the grid, we impact his constituents. We negatively economically impact communities in Appalachia and West Virginia. And so that pattern is seen on cars as well. We're taking away maintenance revenue. Gas stations won't be as needed. We're changing the model by which dealerships exist and sell cars. And so we need to be sensitive to that, and we need to help them transition. And part of that is with funding. Part of that is with employment re-education, so that folks can find different jobs if necessary or change the jobs that they're in. But we need to be sensitive that as we make this transition towards 100% electric mobility, hopefully in the talking about 8% right now, we want 100% long term, that we're helping the people whose jobs are really impacted by this and making sure that everyone is brought alongside of this transition and not just certain groups or individuals.
Yeah, I think just transition is just critical piece to focus on. If we're looking at reshaping systems, we need to make sure that it's done in an equitable way, and that people are not left behind, and we're not just switching to a cleaner form of an equitable system that we currently have, just focusing in on purely, cutting greenhouse gas emissions. So making sure that as we're approaching these policies, that there is a lot of community engagement going directly into communities, listening and hearing where the impacts are being held hardest and what solutions people need, what that really looks like, tying in transportation improvements and redevelopment to affordable housing, making sure that there's standards for how transportation funding is spent, and also tying in housing and land use to that, to make sure that affordable housing is provided, and that as we look at opportunities around transit-oriented development, that those don't create cities that price people out of where they currently live. And thinking, incorporating the historical perspective of what redlining has created to look at kind of directly dismantling some of those impacts, making sure that the cities, the transit systems are accessible, there's good and safe options for biking and walking. There's jobs provided locally so that people aren't forced into long commutes, or that people can actually afford to live near where they work and go to school, and bringing in labor and workforce development pieces, the transition to the electrifying to electric transportation. There's so many opportunities in the kind of design and transportation planning, some of those shifts, but also getting down into installing charging networks and making all these changes and building electric buses and building those, redesigning those depots. There's a lot of union jobs and existing unions in terms of electrical workers that can and should be part of these conversations. And just, thinking critically, some of our state leaders around, workforce development for transportation electrification and clean transportation systems, to make sure that there's job training programs available so people can actually get into those jobs, that manufacturers want to be here in Virginia, so that we have the full cycle and we can really foster this transition.
Awesome, thank you. Well, if there's any other questions that pop up, please share them in the chat. But for now, just wanted to discuss, like, what do you think is the most strategic thing grassroots advocates can focus on right now, and what should be, like, what are the best ways we can keep the pressure up to make sure that we get these bills passed and let them cross the finish line?
We need everybody to be engaged. That's Generation 180's mission statement, is about inspiring and equipping people to take action on clean energy. Same with Sierra Club. We're all about helping people be advocates in this space. And so your voices really, really matter. Even though this is a crazy session and you can't just go meet with your delegate or senator right now, they do still have emails and they do still have phone lines that are taking voicemails. And talk with your friends about this. Make sure members in your community know that these bills are happening, know that this is a priority, that transportation electrification across the board is a huge environmental priority for groups. That's really one of the best things that I personally have seen make an impact, is just spreading the knowledge of these causes in your communities, because the more people who get informed and get engaged on these issues, the more people we have to speak up. And so we, need every community leader we can get to help spread awareness and support these causes.
Yeah, we are trying to do everything to make it easy for people to stay engaged and know exactly who to contact and when, because this session, like every session, but especially, just moves really quickly, and there's a lot of terminology that's hard. What does it mean that a bill's been, read on the House floor? Kind of following and tracking that process. But yeah, we've been asking every legislator that I talk to, what's the best way for your office to be hearing from your constituents, and a lot of them are definitely saying email is great at this point. And we also do know that a lot of people are paying attention to what's conversations on Twitter right now. So if you feel like it and you are a Twitter user, go ahead and send some tweets and letting your representatives know which bills you support and put a personal story behind it. But especially right now, knowing the people who are going to vote on these bills right now are in some specific committees, but eventually these are going to go to the full Senate and the full House. So there's never a bad time to reach out to your representative to let them know which bills that you support as their constituent, and that you expect them to support these bills, as climate solutions and as things that advance public health and provide economic opportunities in Virginia. That they're really strong policies that are working well in other states, and just putting your personal story behind it, what it'll mean for you and your community or your family to have some of these policies in place.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And Kelsey mentioned about how we try to do our best to make things easy. I just put in the chat and also on our Facebook Live comment section an add up page is what we call it, but it's just a kind of a one-stop shop where you can tweet at your legislators about clean cars legislation, you can send an email, makes it easy. That's already pre-written. It talks about, that frames up the context of the Clean Cars Bill and add a personal message. And you can follow updates about what's going on with the legislative process. So if you haven't signed up for it, I encourage you to. But as Blair was talking about, we just need to increase the amount of awareness around these things. So if you can send that tool to anyone that you know, actually also has a video from Gen 180 on there to frame up why this issue is important and why it's so vital that Virginia passes clean cars legislation right now. So please share that with your friends. That is our biggest plug. I know it seems self-serving, but it really does go a long way. Please share these digital tools with them. And those will be updated depending on where the bill goes, what committee it's in, what challenges it's facing. With that, I think that closes our discussion, unless there's anything else, any other legislation you wanted to touch on, or any other resources that you wanted to share.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Blair. Thank you very much. And thank you to Generation Eddie. And of course, thanks to Connor and Kelsey, everyone who's participated in this and all the attendance of this event. We appreciate it. As you know, these are weekly legislative calls between 30, 45 minutes, quick updates. This video, as I mentioned before, will be saved on Facebook as well as on our website. So, we had some great expertise and insight provided today. So if you could share these links with your network, it really will go a long way. As Connor mentioned, we have 15 days left of session, less than. So every little bit counts. Sometimes even as easy as sharing a video can make the difference. So thank you all. I hope you enjoy your weekend. All right. Yeah, Natalie tweeted a second time. Thank you so much. Yeah, everyone stay safe and be well.
Have a good one, y'all.
Thank you all.